All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the ISE Communications Committee webinar on writing impactful commentaries. I'm Ray Yeager at the University of Louisville School of Medicine and member of the ISE Communications Committee. And I'm happy to introduce our fantastic panelists today who have backgrounds across all things commentaries. From Boston University, we have the ISE Commentary Liaisons, Marcia Pescador Jimenez, and Amira Aker, giving an introduction to the basics of commentaries and an overview of the process of writing ISE commentaries. Then we have Bert Brunekreef from Utrecht University, who is the editor of the ISE partner journal, Environmental Epidemiology. He's going to talk about commentaries from an editor's perspective and some information on publication fee waivers for authors in low and middle income countries. And to round out the panel, we have Erika Garcia from the University of Southern California to talk about her recent experience with writing an ISE commentary on future of climate and health research. We'll have some time at the end for questions and discussions, so I encourage everyone to put any questions or topics you'd like to learn more about in the chat. And with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Marcia and Amira. Thanks again for your
Thank you so much,
presentations.
Ray. So I'm just going to start us off with just giving a bit of background on writing impactful commentaries, the how and the why of it all. So what exactly is a commentary? So basically, commentaries are just an opportunity for you to address the scientific community on anything that is of interest to you. So these are not your typical studies. They don't require any additional data. They don't require any additional analysis, but it's really, they're meant to provide an outlet for you to engage with the scientific community or contribute some form of knowledge on a specific topic. And they can include a variety of different things. So I include a small list here, but these are, not limited to these 3 points, but you can present a unique viewpoint on an existing problem. It could be the implications of specific findings for public health policy or action. And these could be either invited by the journal so that you're providing implications over a specific study that might be published in the issue of that journal, or it could be implications of specific findings, over a specific, over a more general topic, and the policy or public health actions that should come, in your opinion, out of these findings. Or it could be descriptions of novel hypotheses and where you can provide some strong plausibility for these hypotheses. And there are a lot of advantages to publishing a commentary. The first is really just it provides an opportunity for you to shape the conversation in our field. And the nice thing about them is because they don't require any additional data or additional analyses, they typically take a lot less time to write and they undergo a faster publication process. And they're a really, really great way for you to provide visibility to your work as well as your thoughts and your research program. And it also provides some networking opportunities. So I'd written a commentary a couple of years ago and ended up collaborating with a brand new colleague because they had ended up contacting me after writing that commentary. So they really provide a fantastic opportunity for you to really share your thoughts over a topic. So this is just a snapshot of some previous commentaries that were published by Environmental Epidemiology and sponsored by our society at ISCE. You can find this list in the website that you see below. We'll share it again later. But this was basically just a list of the commentaries that were recently published. And you can see that they're quite, the topics that they cover are quite wide. So everything from transitioning from climate ambitions to climate to climate action and has valuable health benefits, to talking about ethics in our field in general, to talking about WASH, water, sanitation, and hygiene in Africa. And there are a lot of resources that you can find online on how to write a commentary or guidelines. And I thought that these two resources were particularly well done. The first one provides some really great bullet points and a checklist of things you want to consider when writing a commentary, as well as some video content. And the second one listed here is a commentary on how to write a commentary in peer-reviewed literature. So I thought it was also pretty well written if you wanted to check it out. And now I'll pass it over to Marcia, who will be presenting the rest of the slides.
Thank you, Amira. So I'll be talking about more specifically the process for ISE-sponsored commentaries. So this is an option that is available to ISE active members who are up to date on their membership fees and are interested in contributing an ISE-sponsored commentary to environmental epidemiology. So generally, ISE-sponsored commentaries are less than 2,000 words, and the commentaries can be on any topic of broad interest to ISE members and the readership of environmental epidemiology. But it is important to note that these commentaries do not represent an endorsement from ISE. Rather, ISE seeks to provide a public forum to generate scientific discourse. And while commentaries can be author-initiated or solicited, all commentaries will undergo peer review and are subject to editorial decisions regarding acceptance. And of course, if the commentaries are time-sensitive, the process that I will describe in the next slide can be expedited, but will still need to be followed. Next slide, please. So if the commentary is author-initiated, an initial conversation with the ISE contact person is suggested prior to development of the commentary. And we also recommend sending an outline of the commentary prior to the conversation. And then if ISE sponsorship is agreed upon, then the commentary should be submitted using the commentary category for environmental epidemiology. And the cover letter should mention that the commentary is solicited by the ISE. And then the environmental epidemiology editor-in-chief and the ISE liaisons will remain in contact throughout the submission and review process. So once a commentary is set out for review, at least one independent reviewer will be sought through the Environmental Epidemiology Journal. And authors can also recommend reviewers to the ISE contact people, but final decisions regarding invited reviewers will be up to the ISE liaisons and the Environmental Epidemiology Editor-in-Chief. And then reviewers will be asked to comment on whether the commentary makes substantiated fact-based claims, whether the argument is clearly and fairly presented, and whether the topic is of broad interest to the ISE membership. So if a manuscript is revised after review and accepted by the editor-in-chief, then the editor-in-chief will send it back to us, to the ISE liaisons, for a final check to ensure that the commentary is still in line with ISE sponsorship. And then finally, if it is accepted by the ISE liaisons, and we will communicate this to the ISE Communications Committee and the journal editor-in-chief within 5 to 7 days. So that the commentary can be published in the journal and publicized through ISE channels. Next slide, please. And then all of this information is actually very clearly stated in our brand new commentaries webpage. As you can see here, next slide, please. So please feel free to check it out. That's a web address. And also we encourage potential authors to go to the Environmental Epidemiology Instruction for Authors to find more detail. And then also to our ISE Communications Committee. Please do not hesitate to reach out if you have any questions. Next slide, please. And that's it. Thank you very much. I think Erika, I don't know if you're, oh, there you go.
Yeah, I think we have Bert Brunekreef up next.
All right, can you hear me? I'll share my screen. There you go. Just a few slides about the journal Environmental Epidemiology. We started in 2017, so some 8 years ago now. It started originally as an offshoot of the journal Epidemiology, but over the years it has developed into essentially an independent entity, which is one of the official journals of the ISCE since the start. We publish high quality epidemiologic research and methodological innovations in environmental epi. Its emphasis on health effects related to chemical, physical, biological, and social environment, climate change, and the built environment. So it's pretty wide coverage that we try to achieve, but it has to be epidemiology. If there's no epidemiology in the paper, we will reject it. It's still a small journal in terms of the number of manuscripts that are being submitted, but there's been an increase over the last year, especially. We received an impact factor close to 2 years ago, and for some authors, having an impact factor, which has many reservations, as you all know, but having an impact factor for several authors is a reason to publish in environmental epidemiology. And if there's no impact factor yet, we've had some examples where people just have to wait for that to happen. The slide shows the original research, the reviews, short communications, and also commentaries. So over the years, we've published some 18 commentaries, very wide-ranging topics. You can also see that the percentage of desk rejected and rejected papers after peer review has increased, especially over the last year. I think we're getting, now that we have an impact factor, that there are simply more research institutes and investigators who just give it a try, and there was a somewhat higher quality in the beginning than there is now, but it's probably too early to talk about a real trend. Overall, the journal is doing pretty well, I think, in terms of how many manuscripts are being submitted, and the quality of the review and the papers is quite well accepted, I think, since the beginning. And as I said, it's still a small journal. It's very much seen as a vehicle for ISCE members to publish their work. So most of the papers are actually written or co-authored by ISCE members. So the ISCE membership clearly sees this as a major journal to publish their work in. The language about commentaries in the instructions for authors are that they may address any topic of interest to the environmental epidemiology community, including the implications of specific findings for public health policy or descriptions of novel hypotheses with strong plausibility. Editors occasionally invite commentaries on selected papers without consulting the authors. Authors who wish to respond are free to do so. So let to the editor. I just realized there is now an official website for the commentaries on the ISCE website. So I'll double check with the language that we have. That's not in total disagreement with what you've just showed. I don't think it is, but you want to make sure that it is that it's the same. And finally, you'd already talked about ISCE sponsored commentaries. We invite ISCE members to submit commentaries and policy statements. So I don't need to read this all out, but this is all in the instructions for authors. And commentaries are short and focused articles. Seek to communicate opinions on a key issue or provide insight into important development that is of interest to a large number of scientists. That's all I wanted to say by way of introduction from the journal point of view. I'd be happy to take questions.
Thanks, Bert. And now we'll pass it over to Erika Garcia.
Well, let me move this. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about my experience with our IC commentary that came out last year. We talked, here's the snippet or the screenshot of the commentary, so the future of climate change health research. And so to the story of the commentary is actually kind of goes back. So it came out last year, 2024. We have to go back one more year, 2023, to the IC-NAC meeting that happened. So the North America chapter, this was the first meeting that was put on by the new North America chapter. And I was very honored to be invited as one of the keynote speakers for this meeting, along with a number of my colleagues. And the theme for the conference was environmental justice and climate connections. Let's see if I could get my laser pointer. And this is my first time doing a keynote, presentation, and I thought a lot about what it is that I wanted to talk about, especially in the context of the theme for that year's conference. And so I do a lot of climate change and health research, and I thought a lot about, my work in this space and what I might be able to use this platform for. And there we go. I have a lot of collaborators that I work with in this area, and they're listed here, and these range from folks in public health, environmental health, exposure assessment, and biostats are typical collaborators. And then also people who are in environmental engineering and earth science and atmospheric chemistry, and we have a climate scientist as well. And I thought a lot about the conversations that we had been having around this theme of climate change and health, especially from this more, trying to, there's a transdisciplinary aspect to it as well. And what I landed on at the end was this talk around climate change, health, and research. What are we going to do? And it's a little bit of a funny title, but part of it is like, we know that we need to do this work. We know that identifying relationships are important, something that we typically do in epidemiology, but how do we better push the science forward and really thinking towards action and solutions oriented science? And so I came up with 4 different things that I think we needed to do more of. And again, this is not something that I have come up by myself, something that really came out of a lot of these conversations with my collaborators, things that I've seen in the literature, and things that people are already doing. They weren't new, people were doing. I'm just saying that we needed to do more of them. And so I was really excited about this talk. Of course, I practiced it ahead of time. And one of the sessions when I practiced it, one of my colleagues, George McConnell, who was in the audience when I practiced, he's like, "Oh, this is quite good. You're thinking about writing it up." And I was like, "No, I'm busy." It's not really it's not an original article. It's not, a study and that we're putting out there. It's kind of just these various thoughts that I had that have come again out of all this work that has been done by various folks. So I was like, no, not really. But then I gave the talk at the IC-NAC conference. And then at the time, the IC president, Andrea Baccarelli, came up to me afterwards. There's this nice tweet about the presentation. And I purposefully included this quote from Dr. Kirk Smith, who I was fortunate to be one of his mentors around the, climate change and health and the urgency behind it. So you can read that here if you'd like. But after the talk, Andrea come up to me, he's like, "Oh, that was quite good. Are you thinking about writing it up?" And I was like, "Oh, you're the second person who mentioned that to me." Rob McConnell also mentioned. I was like, "Well, maybe I should." And so we discussed it, and he said, "I think also would be particularly good as an IC commentary." And so this is actually where this commentary came from. I put it together, and based on all these, my experience, my conversations with folks, and then really having individuals say, "This is good. Did you think about writing it up and putting it out there?" So I'll talk a little bit more about our specific process. So once we decided, okay, this is what we want to do. So again, the conference was in June 2023. There was initial communication with Dr. Jamie Hart, who then connected us to Laura and Kenza, who are on the communications committee. And they coordinate the commentary process, at least in 2023 at the time. They were very positive about our commentary idea. So that was great. Moving forward with it. So then we emailed Bert, again, editor-in-chief at the Environmental Epidemiology, pitching this idea of the commentary, inquiring if there are IC slots still available, IC commentary slots still available, and he confirmed that there were slots, and he asked for an outline. So this kind of goes back to what I think Marcia said earlier about, having that outline ready for it. So we sent the outline. We got some feedback, which was quite nice, about how to better position it to fit as an IC commentary and for the audience of environmental epidemiology. So as things go, it took a couple of months to actually draft the commentary. We revised it, co-author revisions, more revisions, and we finalized it. And my co-author list really included many of my climate change and health collaborators. Again, the pictures that I showed earlier. on it. I think this is actually probably the hardest part, because there was a lot of what we wanted to say, but 2,000 words is not a lot of space. And so, we had to be very selective and purposeful with every line that we were using. And, what could we include? What could we not include? How much depth could we go into in some of the points we were trying to make? Do we have to drop a point altogether to make space for another one? So I think that kind of writing is a little different than your typical like manuscript for an original article writing. And so I think it's great that they pointed those resources earlier in the webinar around, writing commentaries, just this, how to write them. So we were slightly over the 2,000 word limit, but we submitted it in May. We did mention in the cover letter that we wanted it to be considered as an IC commentary. And we emailed Bert to let him know that it had been submitted. And we're also asked again to get clearance from the current IC leadership, because it had taken a little bit of time. Andrea was no longer the president of IC at the time. And so we had already been working with Laura and Kenza, again, with the communications committee. So I wasn't sure what else was needed. And so I actually emailed the then president, I think it's the current president of IC, Dr. Nelson Gouveia, and there was some confusion about whether it needed to go to council for approval or not. And then Mary very nicely confirmed that the commentaries didn't need council approval, just support from the communications committee, which we already had. So that was good. And also confirmed that there was a waiver available to use for this submission. So there were still like those slots available. So, some back and forth and some confusion there, but it was all very clearly laid out by Mary. So I appreciate that, that email. So then, so it was submitted. Then in July, we got our, just typical through the peer review process, we got a decision of revise and resubmit. So we revised it and resubmitted it that same month. And then actually by the end of the month, the commentary was officially accepted. So that part was actually quite quick, which was nice. And so we emailed the communications committee folks. At this point was now Laura, Kenza, Mary, and Diana. And they provided a code to use for the article processing charge discount, because you still get the, like the bill for it, if you will. And so they provided the discount to use it, to process it all. So that was all done. And that was the whole process that we experienced as part of the IC commentaries. So I put a couple of considerations, if you're thinking about submitting an IC commentary or any kind of commentary that might be supported by a particular society. So one, review that process and requirements. So it's really great that there's this new website that you can see both past commentaries and see the specifics of the process itself. Have an outline ready and make sure to communicate with the appropriate either committee members, liaisons, chairs, whoever's the right people for both the support and then also for feedback about how maybe better to position the content of the commentary itself. And then also read other recent IC commentaries. I think that can be really helpful, both in sense to try to get a sense of what IC commentaries look like, and then just in general, like the more you read, the better writer you are. And commentaries are a little bit different than a typical manuscript that you might be used to. And then just a last concluding remark for commentaries in general is that the word limits are often quite tight, 2,000 words here in this case. And so you really do have to use space efficiently and with intention. And that was a part that we struggled with the most, especially because we had a very diverse set of co-authors on it from spanning different disciplines. There was a lot of, you need to explain this a little bit more, or like, you should also include this because this is also important, which it's true, but we only have so much space. And so, at the end of the day, you're often not going to be able to say everything you want at the detail that you want to say it. So you have to be very purposeful in your language and remember what is the overall point of this commentary. What are your main messages you're trying to get across? And of course, as a shameless plug, if you would like to read our commentary, I have the citation here, but also the QR code that you can just snap with your phone and take a look at it. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, everyone. And I will quickly point out that there is a link to past ISE commentaries in the chat. And we have plenty of time for any questions or discussion. So feel free to jump into the chat, or I can unmute you, or I think you can mute yourself if you'd like to discuss with the panelists. We did have one question in the chat about how long does the process take with all of the approvals, review, and all that. So Erika, I know you gave your timeline. It looked like that was a little over 12 months total, but it seemed like the reviews and approvals were fairly quick. Is that about how it usually goes?
Yeah, and I'll just add the writing probably was the slowest part in ours. And part of that is, once you start teaching during the semester, everything slows down. So
Yeah, and I can add that from our end, from Amira's and my end, we can reply back for the outline of the commentary within a couple of weeks or less, if possible.
Yeah, and at the journal, it usually doesn't take more than a few months. It's not a research article where reviewers ask for additional analyses, for example, which takes time. They're usually shorter than research articles, and we require one reviewer instead of two. So it's done usually not more than a few months from submission to publication.
Great,
Or sometimes we get a question, can you publish something by the end of this week? And we don't do that.
All right, thank you. And then I have a question to add in, which is, can you all give any examples of commentaries that you've been involved in one way or another that have created an impact, in that, the impact that you hope to have, a different impact? What are you seeing sort of the waves that these commentaries are making?
I'm happy to start, but people please chime in. So the commentary that I wrote was similar to Erika's in the sense that someone approached me to see if we can work on writing something together. And at the beginning, I wasn't sure I was up for it, but it ended up being a fantastic collaboration. And I think the impact that this commentary had, this was not an IC necessarily sponsored commentary, but I think it speaks to the strength of commentaries in general. The impact that it had is kind of what Amira was talking about, the collaborations that I got from that commentary, not only in research, but also in, community and helping out students that read the commentary and approached me to see if we could work together. So I would, I think it's a fantastic way. I don't think it's necessarily highlighted enough, especially for early career folks. I think it's a great way to start publishing and also collaborations with senior people.
And just to add to that as well, I think it's also a great opportunity for people from low and middle income countries to also engage more within the scientific community that can sometimes be a little too North American or European based. So there was the example about WASH in African countries that I thought was a fantastic way that our society was trying to engage some of our other members. So, and as an example, still North American, but we had put a commentary out based out of Canada when I was still based in Canada, and it was stemmed out of a conference that was around environmental health funding in Canada. And basically, there's very little funding for environmental health research in Canada. So we put out a commentary basically speaking to that issue. We had a few paragraphs in there that described the kind of funding that went against environmental health research in Canada. And that article ended up getting picked up and was used in a variety of different conversations at the federal level. So it can have some impact.
yeah, I'll just add that I think in addition to what's already been said, that it's also can be a very nice way to synthesize your own thoughts or a group of folks' thoughts around something in a particular area. So obviously this one on mine was around climate change and health. And as part of that, you might collaborate with that writing with someone maybe you didn't consider before as a collaborator on research in and itself. So in this case with Andrea Baccarelli was on there, and that's not someone who we don't overlap in a research interest necessarily, broadly speaking. But it gave an opportunity to work with him in a way that I previously probably would not have worked with him on this. But again, I think the synthesizing your own ideas, the group's ideas, and then putting it out there for continued discussion in the field, I think it'd be quite nice and a nice benefit of it.
Great, thank you. So a number of you mentioned the benefits and opportunities for new researchers. Can you all perhaps discuss a little bit about ways to get involved with commentaries without necessarily jumping in and leading one right off the bat?
From the point of view of the journal, I would hesitate a little bit to present this primarily as a vehicle for new researchers to get involved with the publication business. I think commentaries are supposed to provide you with some sense of wisdom about a certain area, a certain topic. I would like to see at least a number of more senior folks involved to provide a wider perspective than you might have when you focus primarily on junior researchers. Of course, junior researchers need to learn about publication writing, about commentary writing, about reviewing, in addition to a lot of other things that they need to learn. But I would be hesitant, a little hesitant to present this primarily as an opportunity for new researchers.
So Bert, you mentioned sort of the wider perspective and wisdom. If there are audience members who are thinking about something they might want to lead a commentary on, but are sort of on the fence of whether it meets that bar or not, or whether it's really worth going for, is there a good way to sort of gauge where you are with that, or resources, people that you can reach out to sort of bounce ideas off of and see, whether it's really worth going for, or maybe best left to hold off?
Well, my first recommendation would be to work through ISE committees, because the journal is really an ISE journal, and ISE is the organization that supports a lot of these thoughts and commentary writing. So going through ISE, one or more of the ISE committees, is, I think, a good way to figure out what's important to write commentaries about. And I've had one or two examples over the last few years of commentaries which were not channeled to ISE originally, but I suggested to contact ISE. It's not mandatory, of course, but suggested to contact ISE to gain a broader perspective. And in all cases where I did suggest this was actually done. And I think the commentary is very improved because of that.
Ray, I think we're getting a couple of questions in the chat as well.
Yeah, so somewhat on this topic, someone asked, have there been any student-led commentaries published in environmental epidemiology? Do you encourage commentaries or regularly receive submissions for students, even though they may not have earned their PhD yet or recognized as experts to guide the field? So Bert, I think you kind of already answered that one, but are there potentially topics that might be better for students or trainees to be involved with?
Well, I'm not sure about that. I don't keep track of whether commentaries are submitted by students or more senior people. That would not be easy to figure out if you don't know the people or the organizations themselves. But as I said, I think commentaries should be when published in environmental epidemiology, they should be of interest to the readership of environmental epidemiology. And of course, each and every type of publication is a training exercise for people who write it, and it's more of a training exercise when you start out in the field. And by all means get involved in these kind of things. But I would be a little hesitant to present this primarily as a vehicle for new researchers to be able to get something written up which is not an original research article, because if you want to develop yourself as an environmental epidemiology scientist, you need to do the research and not just talk about it.
And just to add to that, I think ISCE has published student-led commentaries in the past. But like Bert said, it's not necessarily something that we get a lot of, generally speaking. And it's they're usually done in collaboration with someone who would be more senior to help guide the commentary.
And I will just add in, for any students or new researchers who are interested in these topics and potentially assisting in these things, or at least learning more, there's always opportunities out there on the ISE Policy and Communications Committee, either global or within your regional chapters. So there's oftentimes folks that are looking for people with a bit of capacity to help out with things. So that's always a good opportunity as well. So I see another question, which is, what is the difference between a commentary and an editorial? It seems like there's a bit of overlap between the two.
Well, I would see an editorial as something related to a paper that is published in the same issue. And a commentary is apart from that. It could be related to a paper, but it's more wide-ranging, I think, and can be about any topic which is of interest to environmental epidemiologists. To some extent, this is a matter of words, of course, but we have a sort of the description of what a commentary is for environmental epidemiology. We have a description of what the letter to the editor is, and that's about it, I guess.
And I think it does depend on the journal quite a bit. Like, I know that if I have an idea or the kind of article that I want to look, I will go into the instructions of authors for journals I typically publish in and try to find a format that fits what I want to write. So I think, and I can't remember what they are off the top of my head, but I know there are some journals that reserve commentaries to be specific to an article that's published in that issue. What Bert was talking about it being an editorial in environmental epidemiology. So I think it really varies from journal to journal.
Great, thank you. And then it's a bit of a hot topic right now, but are commentaries a good vehicle to provide basically responses to current events? So if there's regulatory changes or environmental events that happen that might relate to your field, and sort of fall into that evidence-based commentary approach, is that an appropriate route to sort of affect the recent topics?
Well, it's a possibility. If you look at the major medical journals like the New England, the Lancet, the British Medical Journal, they have a zillion commentaries every issue, basically, about often about policy relevant issues, politically sensitive issues. And I realize that with the current situation in the US, this has become much more sensitive than it was in the recent past. But I don't think we should shy away from tackling issues that the membership or the authors feel are important for the field and the colleagues to discuss, and we should not be silent about it.
Yeah,
so
and
of course, easy for me to say, being from Europe. But
I was going to say, I think my first commentary was actually in environmental epidemiology, talking about the last bombardment of Gaza. So not the current one, not the one that started in 2023, but the last time. That was my first commentary in environmental epidemiology, talking about the environmental health impacts of that. So I definitely agree that I think that's a good way to use commentary space.
And I was just going to add that it's actually touches a little similar on what we were saying earlier, that different journals might call it something else. They might call it an editorial or a letter to the editor or something like that. But if the journal has published similar things like that in the past, then it's a good indicator that they would continue to publish something like that in the future. And so that might be depending on the journal and the specific topic that you're touching on. maybe a little bit of finding where the best fit would be and thinking about audience as well.
I think a good way to get a sense of what environmental epidemiology and ISE sponsored commentaries are about is to go and read the list that we provided in our webpage. I think that would give folks a very good idea.
Yeah, I agree. I think I counted a few more than were on your list. I couldn't. The print was very small, so I couldn't see exactly how many there were on your list. But I counted something like 16 over the last years. That's if you search for commentaries. If you go to the website of the journal and you go to the search box and you type in simply commentary, you get 16 hits. There may be pieces of writing talking about commentaries without being commentaries themselves, but I didn't check.
All right. Well, one last topic for discussion. I know in ISE there's a lot of multidisciplinary researchers. So could you all just touch on how commentaries in our field and in the journal Environmental Epidemiology might differ from norms or approaches that are common in other related fields? You know, are there any big differences, or does it sort of work the same if you're in, say, like climate science or geography or medical research? You know, a little compare contrast for those who have a foot in both worlds.
Well, one example that I might mention is the commentary that I myself with 2 colleagues wrote about reviewing umbrella reviews of systematic reviews of original research. And that's a big thing nowadays. We've got a zillion publications coming out every year. We've got somewhat less than a zillion colleagues and institutions who want to review those papers and write systematic reviews. And now we are in this stage where we get umbrella reviews, which are reviews of systematic reviews. And they're getting further and further away from the original publications. And it's becoming harder and harder if you go to that abstract level of reviewing to really find out what's going on at the ground level, so to speak. And that's an example of where systematic reviews have, I think, started in the clinical world with CRTs, where the importance and the approach of doing systematic reviews is actually quite different from observational science like environmental epidemiology. And that's something that we ran into in a big way when we revised the air quality guidelines from the World Health Organization the last time around. Then WHO had adopted a handbook of guideline development, a 200-page document that spells out in great detail what you should or should not do to develop guidelines. But they're very much based on approaches taken in reviewing CRTs, and that's a very different animal than the observational science that you do in environmental epidemiology. That simply requires a different approach to review the evidence when it comes to supporting policy making. So that's, in a nutshell, what this commentary was about. And it was also about other things, but.
I was gonna add to what Bert just said. I think that's a really cool way to that commenters can be helpful on, is to present methods that are not necessarily very familiar within environmental health, that come from other fields or other disciplines. And yeah, I think that's kind of what you were getting at, right? So how these multidisciplinary collaborations can work through commentaries.
And I'll add on ours, because ours was very much a multidisciplinary team of folks that were on the author list. It was a little interesting because we actually have a sentence in there, because we're talking to the fields, and we're like, what field are we talking to? Are we talking to environmental epidemiologists, right? Environmental as the journal? Are we talking about public health researchers? Are we talking about anyone who's engaged in climate change and health research? I can't remember where we landed. We might have just landed on like climate and health researchers to keep it much broader, because not, everyone that was actually probably only half of the people on, maybe even like a third of the people who are on there would consider themselves environmental epidemiologists primarily. And then also the content of what we were writing, again, some pieces come out more important to another discipline, it's still important from how we're viewing some of the research that we're doing, but then trying to think of, well, is that an important thing that we want to make sure to keep in this, 2,000 word limit commentary? And so this thing of like trying to be broader, but still trying to be focused, thinking about the audience for this particular journal. And then I think on top of that, I think it mattered more, like, I don't know, depending on when you were trained or you're generally your age, like, you might remember when you'd go down to your public health library, if you had one at your university, and you'd read the actual like hard copy of the journal. So it's like, this is the one that I would read every month. Now everything's digital, everything, we can get through PubMed. And so I think the audience thing is maybe a little bit less because people, you can search it, you can go through Web of Science if you, more broadly across science, and find a lot of different things that aren't specific to like, this is your field's journal. So I think a lot of people can come to the space and see these articles much in a much broader scale than we did before. So something around audiences is maybe less important, though you still have to be clear about who you're trying to message, because you also don't want to be like all over the place either.
Great, thank you. And then one final topic. Bert, could you just briefly touch on the low and middle income country waivers available for publication fees?
Yeah, there's a number of waivers available for authors from low and middle income countries. And actually, we have difficulty finding enough papers that would qualify for those waivers. So there is still not many papers that are being submitted from low and middle income countries. And that's reflecting, I think, the poor development of our field in low and middle income countries so far. So even though there are possibilities and there is active chapters in ICE for different parts of the world, that still does not yet produce a large flow of papers. There are some, but I would like to see more. And it's not because there are no waivers. The waivers that are available are not completely exhausted so far. So it's more like the field needs to develop further in some parts of the world to produce papers that can be published.
What's the requirement for that? Is it like anything around like either the first author or corresponding author? Is it any of the authors? How do you define eligibility for these kinds of waivers?
Yeah, it's first, senior, and last author as a starting point, but you can of course imagine situations where this does not completely qualify. So it should we don't want to be in a situation where authors are added to a list of authors just because we need a window ICE member, so to speak, to be eligible for the APC waiver. So we'd like to see more actual involvement of authors from low and middle income countries with respect to these particular waivers. But it's first, last, and senior author, but negotiable if situations are a little different from that.
All right, well, with that, we can go ahead and wrap things up. So thank you so much to all of our fantastic panelists. There was so much great information covered on commentaries from so many different perspectives. So hopefully the audience is now motivated, if it applies, to go and at least consider some commentaries and how to collaborate with ISE on those. And then I also want to thank Mary and Diana on the communications committee for their help organizing this webinar. And with that, I hope everyone has a great rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.